Welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I am the host, Attorney John Khosravi, and I practice U.S. immigration law exclusively. For more information about the program, please visit www.immigrationlawyerspodcast.com. Please note that this recording is informational only and does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with a licensed attorney for specific legal guidance that suits your case. Also, this recording is copyrighted and written permission is required for rebroadcasting. For more information about me, please visit www.jqqlaw.com. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 71 of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. It's going to be a fun, little bit sad episode because, as you know, of all the changes that have been happening with the Immigration Department and just how crazy it's been being an immigration attorney and really being an immigrant in the United States. But to start off with a little bit of fun note, the San Francisco conference finished last month, AILA's annual conference, and I had a really good time meeting everyone who's a listener, everyone who's involved. I met so many different people and I learned so much. It was just a wonderful time. And I always recommend everybody go to the national conference, especially, if not regional ones, but the national one's a lot of fun, no matter where it is. It's definitely worth the value based on the information that you get and the value you get out of it. If you're there and you're active and you're listening and meeting people. You know, I don't get anything for AILA for saying that, but I have to say every time I go there, it's a blast. It's like seeing old friends. And also I learned valuable information that actually earns me money because either it's new marketing techniques or new things about cases in the law that I didn't know about that when I learn add value to my firm where it passes down and creates more revenue. So that's definitely a thing to go to. Now on the sad side, San Francisco is a disaster. When I was walking down, if you go down the wrong street in that place, and not really anywhere, homeless people everywhere, smoking crack, just doing whatever they want to do in the worst possible way, chasing people. That city is a hot mess. I was really disappointed to see how bad San Francisco's gone. I think the last time I was there was a couple years ago, and I don't remember it being that bad. It was gross at that point, but now it's just disgusting. So it's sad to see a California city fall so low. And it seems like the government there doesn't give a damn about cleaning it up or have some sort of rules to help adjust the place and let people run their businesses and their lives. I spoke at the MVC panel. I think there's more than 300 people there, and it was really interesting because in the beginning you asked how many people are new here, and about like 40% of those people raised their hand saying it's the first year they've been practicing immigration law. So we have a booming field. I think a lot of them are going to get burned out after these USCIS DHS memos come out, which I'm going to discuss briefly. I think, or maybe, I'll go with that in a second. Finally, regarding the panel regarding AILA, I was also on the law student panel, and it was a great bunch of students who came out all the way to San Francisco. I think there was like 30 or so people there. Really good people, really good students, the future of our practice. One of them said an interesting thing. Before he went to law school, he said he was part of like a law tuition debt management people, the ones that help you refinance and stuff like that. And a note of warning and of information that he gave us is if you have debt, check to make sure your debt matches what the school actually gave you, because sometimes there's miscommunication where the schools will say to the debt company they gave you more money in loans than they actually gave, and so you're going to pay a principal and interest on that larger amount that's not justified. It happens frequently enough where that's part of their checklist of things to do when they're checking a new client who's going to refinance and do that loan kind of stuff. So that was interesting news. Now, getting to the memo, this talk I'm going to have today, this podcast, I always do notes in my podcast and prepare for it, and then usually something pops up where I have to put it off and stuff. And the notes I'm going to go through right here, I think I made last week. And one thing is, every time I go do a podcast, there'd be a new memo, a new piece of news, and it would force me to adjust it. And at this point, I'm just going to save a lot of the stuff for the next podcast. This goes without saying I have to talk about, which is the new memos, particularly two of them. One was the NTA memo, where they said that if a person gets, their change of status or something denied, they're immediately going to be put into removal proceedings if their underlying status is non-existent. So if they're without status, even if USCIS makes a mistake or appeals pending, instead of giving them the time to leave or the 180 days, 3-year bar being the penalty for overstaying after that, they're going to put them into removal, which sucks because then they have to go to removal, and to wait for that hearing date, they're going to accumulate more unlawful presence. And also there's a separate memo, not one of the two I mentioned, I stated I was going to talk about students who fall out of status in some way as of August 10th, I believe it is, they're going to automatically start accruing unlawful presence, whereas before the duration of status kept their status alive until USCIS denied a change of status petition or they were in removal proceedings. So these are disastrous consequences because there's a lot of room for USCIS error and innocent error that's going to cause very drastic effects on people's lives. The new one that came out that was very demoralizing, and we have to be very strong to deal with these things. And I think the administration is intentionally doing this. And our clients are the people who bear the brunt of this. But as immigration attorneys, we'll have 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 clients that'll be affected from this. So we're like a concentrated core of all these people's pressure onto one. So we're really psychologically bearing a lot of the brunt of all this. Is the new memo that they said RFEs, they're going to start cutting down on RFEs and just issuing denials right off the bat. This is disastrous, this is unfair, and this is something that needs to be, Congress needs to look at this, and the lawsuits need to happen about this. It's very vague standard now as to what they'll consider requiring RFE and what will be a straight denial. For example, they say if you don't file an I-864 affidavit of support, that's going to lead to a denial right off the bat without an RFE. Well, first of all, people who file their immigration cases on their own, I would say probably 10 or 50% of the time, don't do the affidavit of support because they don't understand it. And I see this all the time. So many of these people are going to get denied, and so many of them might be out of status, which is going to cause them to be NTA. For example, if it was overstay for a spouse of a U.S. citizen, normally they could just refile or something like that. They're immediately going to get an NTA, a notice of appear to go to immigration court. But now that kind of disaster is going to happen to them. Now, in one sense, this causes the need for more immigration attorneys to practice because these people at this point can't even go through the risk of doing it themselves or hiring an notario or one of these kind of form fillers, because if they make an error, the results are drastic and very harsh. On the other hand, as immigration attorneys, we got to be very careful to have perfection in our applications. Even simple errors could be a problem, especially because it's vague. They're saying the stuff that has to be part of the application has to be submitted. So what about photos? What if we forget to post those? Or for example, so many times, majority of the times where my cases had the USCIS said documents were missing, I would say 9 out of 10 times, it's because USCIS either didn't see it or they lost it themselves. So what's going to happen if they mistakenly claim that I didn't submit something when I did or didn't sign something when I did, they're going to deny it. That's preposterous, but that's the result that's going to happen instead of giving people the opportunity to correct errors. So that is a terrible thing to go through. Then there's other ththings. I don't usually do OPT and H-1B and EB-2C or perm-related cases, Department of Labor and that kind of cases. But I came across a case I've been dealing with about STEM OPT and the extension, and learned that USCIS overnight changed the website, but the regulations don't match what they changed regarding third-party work sites. So they're just doing a lot of crazy things. It's very, very difficult to deal with, and it puts a lot of pressure on practitioners because the law keeps changing. We need consistency in the law, and one of the bad things about immigration is the code has been written so vague in general that it's given space for the agencies to develop their own rules. But agencies are, depending on administration, the people in charge, change. So we never know what the rules are, so we can rely on that. So when clients come to that, we don't know exactly how far we could push it, because one day it's okay, one day it's not. One USCIS officer will approve it, one won't. And it creates way too much uncertainty. And in a republic that's based on laws, the less uncertainty we have about the rules, the better. Frankly, it may be better to have bad laws, but know what the laws are, as opposed to not having laws, because then we're at the whim and opinion of a random person that's has no face somewhere in some service center making a final decision on someone's life, and that's not a way to run a legal system. Now, talking about ways of not to run a legal system, the biggest thing that's happening in the news with government immigration is the separation of children at the border. It's a disastrous policy, and I was surprised to see how many regular people off the street, when I tell them I'm an immigration attorney, just express so much sorrow. Now, I've seen them do such harsh things to people in the past, and I hope people don't think negative of me. I didn't think this was that bad relative to the nasty kind of things that they've been doing to immigrants and people at the border over the last several years and internationally. Frankly, it's disastrous and inhumane, but when you look at the Iraq War, the bombing of Syria, what they did to Libya, what they're doing to Central America, and all these kind of things, the violence and brutality against children, against families, against people who are just doing their lives, they aren't even trying to attack the national security of the United States or enter the United States, has existed and is so catastrophic that, and relatively, I was kind of numb to it, saying, okay, this is obviously the kind of things that they do. But I was happy to see pushback, and that's definitely there. But there's big talk of what to do. There was that one lawyer, Avenatti, I think it is, who was, there's that one stripper, or I'm sorry, she's a porn star or stripper that's involved with Trump, and her lawyer started going to the border and doing stuff, and there's talk about the way he wants to deal with it is incorrect because he has no experience in this area, and there's talk and stuff. Now, actually, I think her name is Stormy Daniels, but I don't know exactly what to do about these kind of situations, and because I don't do with removal and I haven't gone to the border and done those kind of activities. I'll let the people who handle these kind of cases on a regular basis, have more experience in removal proceedings and issues of asylum, talk about this, as it's not my area of expertise. But one aspect of it is they're intentionally doing this as a psychological and propaganda purpose to scare people from coming, similar to Guantanamo Bay for terrorism. Putting 10 people in Guantanamo Bay is not going to stop terrorism, but it was this idea that if we talk about how we torture them, it might scare them from doing stuff. It's yet to be seen if that's really the case. I think at doing this at the border, they're trying to dissuade people from coming, and I still don't think that would be the case. When you're in a country like El Salvador and the gangs are going to abduct your children and do all kind of havoc, you'll take your chances at the U.S. border as opposed to being in a chaotic country. But thinking about it, there's one thing that we could do to help the children, and this popped up this week or a week or two ago, is CSPA. So, I don't know what to do about children on the border, but they're children who are derivative beneficiaries of green card cases. And because of CSPA, the Child Status Protection Act, they could adjust status or do consular processing and get an immigrant visa with their parents based on their preference category, based on the visa bulletin and all that. Now, I had a F3 category child of a grandchild of a U.S. citizen, which falls within that category derivative, that came to me, and they looked up stuff online, and they went to several attorneys, and unfortunately the information online and through these attorneys mistakenly said that the CSPA, the Child Status Protection Act, doesn't apply to F3 and F4 preference category derivatives. They said a couple years ago they stopped that. Well, the reality is this. There was a case, I think it's called Skialaba, and if I'm pronouncing that right, that said the provision in CSPA under the statute where if someone ages out of the F3 or F4 preference category as a derivative, after doing the calculation, they're aged out. There was thought that that petition automatically is converted to an F2A preference category and the priority date remains the same. The court said no, if someone ages out of F3 or F4, they don't automatically become an F2 category or F2B, F2A, and they have to, the parent, the new green card only parent, has to refile for them and go through the whole process in that way. That's all that court case said. But if you go online to a lot of resources, including what I consider legitimate ones, and immigration attorneys, they just across the board said no more CSPA status for F3, F4, and a couple of attorneys that my client consulted with said the same thing, and it was very gross because one attorney didn't even go to the consultation my client paid for. They had a paralegal go there, and the paralegal said, oh yeah, I've had a situation like this, it doesn't work, and the paralegal gave him wrong advice. And this person has great reviews on Yelp and has videos and stuff, and I was really disappointed that they didn't take the time, the respect to go and talk to a client themselves and give them good advice. That was a double whammy. Malpractice in my opinion, but that's just how it goes. I'm glad the client had the wherewithal to go and talk to a lot of people. So going back to the situation at the border, I don't know what to do about the kids there, but I'm sure there's thousands of kids who had a right to a green card but were forced to be separated from their parents because online resources from attorneys and attorneys in person gave them bad advice, forcing them to be separated from their parents in the home country until a new F2 petition could be made and they could adjust status through something to be able to get a status in the U.S. So that was a very sad thing, but it's something I know we could do stuff about, and I'm sure thousands of people who couldn't afford to get a consultation with an attorney or dealt with bad attorneys using these online resources as help, got bad information, decided not to pursue their immigrant visa case. So that's a really important piece of information. I wanted to put it out there to practitioners and new people practicing immigration law. Fortunately, immigration law is really tough. It's so complicated. When my client told me that, I spent so many hours double checking my work because there's just so many different viewpoints on this, but it's clear that it does apply. And that's the thing about immigration law. It's hard to get into it, to really learn it, because it changes constantly too. Now, with all the terrible things that are happening, there's an abolish ICE movement that's picking up steam and hashtags and all this stuff. And ICE is pretty ruthless right now the way they're doing things. It's very sad. And it's not just ICE, it's other departments that are investigatory departments within DHS. But I'm not sure what the end game would be for ICE. ICE is a new agency on its own that happened after 9/11 and all that. But there's always going to be a mechanism to police the immigration process. So if ICE isn't there, somebody's going to be there. So one thing is, what is the end game? So if you say abolish ICE, what is the alternative? What kind of thought process is there? Because just by saying abolish ICE, what you do is increase partisanship. And, people take the other side who might have lawful questions. Okay, we abolish ICE, what's going to replace it? And if one side is just saying abolish ICE, they're kind of saying anything goes to immigration. Then there's the other side who is maybe, obviously, the people who hate immigrants, but there's people that are like not as much hating them, but at the same time saying, okay, we need a fair system. When they hear someone say abolish ICE, they're gonna draw the lines and go to the opposite side. So this kind of rhetoric is pretty dicey, and I prefer more thoughtful rhetoric rather than just Twitter kind of 10-word or 20-word responses. Has to be much more thoughtful. Now, there's riots in the street, there's more animosity, and so what's happening is really pushing you apart. I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, and he had this one rock and roll star, I forgot his name, but this is a guy that has a certain viewpoint that's considered right wing, and he was, in his opinion, people who were like a pro-immigration policy were the enemy. That's the terminology, is the enemy, and that's very, very dangerous when within the union, some people, because of of policy, decide to label the other side the enemy. And that's the last thing we want to do, is to draw lines in the sand, whether you're with us or against us. That's a recipe for disaster and civil disunion, which can lead to much more catastrophic stuff. So this kind of talk has to be open, but it's more thoughtful than simple 2-word or 3-word things. Now, my take on all this is, on the side, is the civil liberties aspect of what ICE is doing. There's massive technological improvements they're doing to scan the populace for illegal immigrants. And the catastrophe in that is that same technology could easily be used and abused against native-born citizens or real citizens, naturalized, or anyone else in the population when they're vocal about certain political speech or thought, to track them. And it's very dangerous. In my opinion, it's when you balance it out of whether we should have illegal immigrants or we should have a crazy kind of technological tyranny where you track people, I'd rather have the illegal immigrants here, because preserving our liberty in the United States is what's going to preserve the peace and our strength. We see certain tech companies with their employees, I think it was Google was one, and several others, that are pushing back against cooperation between the tech companies and ICE and the activities they're doing, which is good to a certain extent. But I think even the companies who said they're going to stop are probably going to have secret programs to continue it. The government's always going to push these kind of things, and it's very hard to push back against it unless the populace is really conscious and find different solutions to these problems other than just hunting people down like they're animals. And you see in the news like just horrible things happening. There's one case, and at first when I read it, I understood it as one way, but it's actually another. This pilot and an accomplice had a Chinese student that they were training, and they kidnapped that Chinese student to send him outside the country. And at the time when I read it, I thought, damn, these people are so anti-immigrant that they're like kidnapping people and sending them out. But then there's the thought that says the Chinese government is trying to abduct, people like that, using agents in the U.S. if they're maybe against, the Communist Party or something like that. But you see policy is changing now, like potentially people who, U.S. people who host immigrant children, if they're out of status, they get deported too for that kind of activity. They're boarding Greyhound buses constantly, checking people, and the way they define the border is 100 miles, I think, from any border, which is essentially any urban center in the United States. The Border Patrol could go and check, so they're stopping cars, checkpoints, all this kind of stuff, stopping commerce, hassling U.S. citizens. It's a terrible thing. Shutting down highways, and in Maine and New Hampshire, they're shutting down highways and having checkpoints. And sometimes they're giving chase to immigrants who they think are illegal. There was the case where 5 illegal immigrants were killed when an SUV was flipped in a 100-mile-per-hour chase with border agents. I'm like, is it that bad where you got to flip cars and potentially people die? I don't know. I think that's too extreme. And then there's stories of people that were deported who killed themselves or immediately got killed upon deportation. So these are very sad stories. And border arrests exceeded $50,000 for the 3rd month in a row. So that's the situation there. And people who thought they were immune if you had a green card for many years but you had some sort of arrest, they're coming after you for that. They're doing all sorts of things to crack down on the life of people who have been here or living peacefully, instead of really focusing on the so-called dangerous immigrants, the ones who committed crime. So that lack of priority is telling, because If there's a danger from certain people, let's get the dangerous ones off first and then deal with the next level of people. But it's willy-nilly. Now, follow up to all this is the travel ban. So the Supreme Court upheld the travel ban. And so how do we deal with that? I get a lot of calls from people wanting help about this, and I really don't have an answer. I've had Iranian clients who deal with Abu Dhabi and Ankara, and both those embassies have told my clients and myself not to send waiver packages in. It's something they do their own. But I've had their attorneys say, no, they've given waiver packages to them at the embassy. They've emailed and mailed it to them. And so it's kind of unclear what's going to happen. Some are kept in administrative processing, it's not clear, some are refused. I've been hearing word of, Somali, Syrian, Yemenis cases approved, but I haven't heard or seen myself, at least, immigrant visas issued to Iranian nationals. So it seems this is really an anti-Iran move. The rest are moving forward to a certain extent. There's even former consular officers who have called the waiver process a fraud, which it seems like it is right now, and hopefully these lawsuits about that will go forward to develop it, to see what exactly is going on. Now, just some side notes in news. In immigration, the 11th Circuit held that immigration judges may waive inadmissibility, so that might be a case if you're handling those kind of issues, especially in the 11th Circuit. It's good to know. Also, there was a case where a Salvadoran woman was forced to do chores for a rebel group, and her asylum was denied, saying she provided material support for terrorism, even though it was under force. So it's very strict reading of the asylum statute in that way, and it's very sad. Now, here's a lot of random practice notes I wrote down that's popped up from the week. One is for personal servants. So if you're a U.S. citizen overseas and you have a personal servant that's with you and you want to come to the U.S. for a period of time, there's a State Department note that explains this in a memo, 2015 DOS memo, and in reference to 9 FAM 4131. It looks like it says the servant can stay on a tourist visa up to 6 years. And I'm not sure if I'm reading this right. I've had people contact me about this, and I've been able to give good advice and refer to other people that may have done this. But if you can bring a servant with you, someone helps you in a certain way, that's helped you in the past overseas, that's an interesting thing that they get status for that period of time and essentially get paid too. So it's sort of a work permit. Moving on, there was a change in the regulation that happened, I think, last January 2017, that said when you have an H-1B, you have a 60-day grace period, H-1B and a couple other ones, to find a new job. And I thought that was just a statutory grace period, but it came to my attention that it's discretionary. So that's 60 days up to discretion of USCIS. So that was really obnoxious because they make something but then make it discretionary, which is up in the air, and it's hard to give people advice. Luckily, I don't handle H-1B cases, so that bad knowledge of the law didn't affect any of my clients, but it's discretionary, so you got to fine-tune that language and to note that it's not an obvious thing that they're going to get that 60-day grace period. Another thing that happened is I had a client contact me and they had filed their own marriage case and it was denied, and they came to me. And then what happened is the foreign spouse that got married and divorced and then remarried the petitioner, U.S. citizen petitioner, and in the translation of the divorce certificate, in the translation of the marriage certificate to the new spouse, this was an Islamic marriage, they didn't say it was like an official marriage, or the translation wasn't done properly, so it looked like the marriage was like an open marriage, some sort of Islamic kind of thing, and they denied the case. And so one thing to note, even if you get translations, read the translations and make sure it makes sense, because you don't want these kind of cases happening on your watch to have problems. And also, I had a colleague, unfortunately, tell me this story where he filed a I-751 removal of conditions. Now, apparently I-751s go to the service center, so you can't use the credit card form there either. It's not a lockbox. So he sent it in within the 3-month period. What's happening with the service center right now that's handling removal of condition cases, it's taking 1 or 2 months for them to even open the package and issue a receipt. So by the time they opened his package, they saw that he had incorrectly used a credit card. They mailed the whole package back to them, and the 3-month window had expired. It had been 2 years since the green card for the applicant has been issued. Normally, you just resend it and say, sorry, I made that mistake. But 3 days after the expiration of the green card, they received a notice to appear in NTA in the mail. So USCIS is cracking down hardcore. They're not even giving you leeway. So now you have to go to removal proceedings to deal with that, potentially resubmit that I-751 to USCIS in the meantime to keep that case open. But be careful with that credit card system, and also be prepared. They're not messing around. They're issuing these NTAs, and it's going to happen. It's a mess. Now, that's another side note. Form I-907 premium processing was changed again after like a month and a half, and they're doing that so frequently. It's very obnoxious. They've expanded online filing for Form N-336 and N-535. I traditionally don't file anything online, I-90s or NASA and stuff. I just do the traditional paper route. Those options are available as well. FOIA processing has been updated online, how it's happening, so definitely take a look at that. I haven't done a FOIA in a while, so I haven't adjusted to the new system before I used to fax it, but that's something to note. The American Embassy in Nicaragua was shut down for fear of violence and such, and that's interesting because Nicaraguans, so many are here because of violence and filing for asylum and the car and stuff like that. The U.S. Embassy doesn't feel safe. I think those people feel safe, and we've had so much involvement in that country that caused a lot of this uneasiness and tensions that exist there. There's email processing required for email for EB-5 petitions now. I haven't done those in a while. I'm thinking about even not getting into EB-5 anymore because it's such a hassle and so unreliable. But they're doing EB-5 processing requirement. And DHS has announced that they need more time to evaluate the Immigrant Investor Program, EB-5, to do an overhaul of it, so they're not ready yet. There's a mass ICE agents, now in Massachusetts, ICE has reinstated its policy to arrest people at the interview. That's happening more and more. It's a very scary thing. So if you have like a 601 situation where you're going to file a waiver, but you have to do an I-130 interview, some people are not having the beneficiary go to the interview out of fear that they're going to pick up and just do the petitioner. Now argue with the officer that only the petitioners needed to be there for the interview. There's a potential that they may accuse the petitioner or the person driving the beneficiary to the interview as, you know, helping an illegal immigrant or like evading and that kind of stuff. So it's getting very, very nasty. In USCIS opened an LA office to track the use of fake IDs and the like for naturalization. They're really cracking on reopening NATS cases. So even if you're a citizen, you naturalize, you're not safe. That's how it's going right now. Also, USCIS for a while was accepting service requests for I-765 employment authorization documents that are past the 75th day of processing. They've shut that down and said, no, we have to wait longer to be able to file a complaint about that. So that's it for this episode. A little short one. There's a lot we can talk about, but it's still disheartening and it's just a whole mess. But there's more stuff I want to talk about and more people I'm going to get involved in interviews, and potentially I'm getting some guest co-hosts to put out more material to really do education primarily. The goal of this podcast is first and foremost to educate immigration attorneys as to the practice. So I want to get back to that core value and do more material on that, both written videos, CLEs, and the like, and I'll keep you all posted on that. If you like this episode, please leave a like on iTunes and on YouTube. Leave a review. It would be appreciated. I'm John Khosravi, immigration attorney. My email is info@jqqlaw.com. Please reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn as well, and follow my Twitter account. There's information that pops up there, as well as the YouTube page, the Immigration Lawyers channel. I think it's going to be a fun year with regards to these training programs starting. It's a lot of work getting up and running, and it always takes longer than you think, but I'm going to be connecting a lot more with listeners and doing more educational stuff that's going to help you build your practice, both learning the law and how to run the business, because it is a lucrative field, as I said in previous podcasts. Immigration, you do a lot of good work and you make a good living. Unfortunately, it's not happening a lot to colleagues, and based on the statistics I see they put out on legal practices and how much immigration attorneys make, we're really bearing the brunt of the lowest income level of attorneys, and that shouldn't be the case because of the importance of the type of work we do and the level of stress that we take on dealing with people's lives. I sometimes feel like I'm a doctor giving a patient bad news, like life and death disease, every time I have a consultation that's not going the right direction with regards to their life. And this is, you know, there's always been cases that weren't good and you already know it's not going to happen, but there's cases that used to be okay that are coming in today, whereas, you know, if they came yesterday, I'd be, oh, there's no problem. They come today and I have to tell them some disastrous thing or add worries and tension into their lives. So this kind of stress has to be properly funded with regards to fees, so that you have the ability to lower your personal, at least home life stress levels and your bill stress levels, so you could absorb the stress of third parties coming in that you're taking on and contracting to help them with. And that's the importance of it. It's not about just accumulating money just to do it. It's to have enough so your home is secure and your family is secure financially, so that you can put yourself out there on the front lines to help people that are dealing with difficult situations. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast, episode 71. As I said, reach out to me, info@jqqlaw.com. I'm John Khosravi. Until next time, have a great week. Bye-bye.